Hello and welcome back to Eric's Geography Vlog. This is the second episode of three in today's three-episode special. Uh, Last episode we talked about the Somalian famine and the causes that caused it, and now we're going to be talking about vulnerability. And this as part of the syllabus is dedicated 4 hours, and of course we're going to be talking about what vulnerability is. And from the syllabus we will be explaining the reasons why people live in hazardous areas, as well as discussing the vulnerability as a function of demographic and socioeconomic factors, and of a community's preparedness and ability to deal with a hazard event when it occurs. We will also explain the reasons for some sectors of a population being more vulnerable than others. Essentially, vulnerability is the susceptibility of a community to a hazard or to the impacts of a hazard event. We've already talked about how we're pretty accurate when it comes to predicting where a hazard event will occur. So the question is, if we know already where these hazard events can occur, why do people choose to live in vulnerable areas? People either choose or are forced to live near potential hazards for a number of reasons. These reasons include poverty, as in not being able to afford to live anywhere that is not prone to hazards, the presence of fertile soils, especially around volcanoes, the presence of geothermal energy, especially, of course, around volcanoes, which are prone to volcanic activity. Tourists might choose to live near volcanoes because of their aesthetics, as well as often thermal springs, which are famous in especially Japan or Iceland. Some people might choose to live in a hazard-prone area if their family has already lived there in the past, as in the inertia of their family makes them live in a hazard-prone area. Some people are also ignorant to the fact that they are in a hazardous area. And on the other hand, people may be so trusting in scientific prediction that they are willing to live in hazardous areas as they believe that they will be able to predict hazard events and give them adequate warning to protect themselves or leave in adequate time. Some people may also choose to live in hazardous areas because the hazards don't occur very often, as in many volcanoes remain dormant for thousands of years, and this means that people don't view it as a dangerous area and therefore are more likely to live near it. And the presence of resources is also another reason to live near a hazardous area, as they are more present in those areas, such as sulfur being located near volcanoes, as well as copper being located near tectonically active areas. Now we're on to what actually makes a population more or less vulnerable. Essentially, there are both human and physical factors that can either increase or decrease a population's vulnerability. Human factors that increase risk and vulnerability include overcrowding and high population density, areas with large amounts of informal housing, such as in Papua New Guinea, areas that have been deforested, populations that live in remote and inaccessible areas, countries with poor transport and communications, countries that are heavily indebted, as well as countries with poor medical health care or poor medical care. Physical factors that increase risk and vulnerability include hazard hotspots, so where a hazard event is more likely to occur, low coastal countries, which are more prone to flooding and tsunamis, countries with large rivers, which are also prone to flooding, areas in between the tropics that suffer from hurricanes that we've already talked about, areas that lie in tectonically active areas, such as the boundaries between tectonic plates, and arid areas that are likely to suffer from droughts. There are also many ways that humans can decrease the risk and vulnerability of a population, such as mapping an area for hazards so the population live in safer areas instead. Areas that have early warning systems like Japan's earthquake system. Areas that are trained highly with rescue teams and good medical care, again, like Japan with earthquakes. Countries that are earthquake-proofing building designs, as an example, again, Japan. And countries that have educated populations in hazard management, as countries that have well-educated populations when it comes to hazard management, i.e. Japan again, and countries that have developed sea defenses and shelters when it comes to drought or floods, when it comes to tsunamis. Some physical factors are also able to decrease risk and vulnerability. These include being, of course, in areas that have low frequency of hazards, like the UK, areas that only suffer from relatively low magnitude hazards, living in areas that have a steady climate, as in not too hot or not too cold, not too wet and not too dry, and areas that only suffered from one of the major hazards, giving the population more ability to prepare for that specific hazard instead of having to prepare for a variety of hazards less properly. The frequency and magnitude of hazards are also both increasing, which results in an increased vulnerability around the world to hazard events. The reasons that the frequency and magnitude of natural hazards are increasing is because of desertification due to improper farming techniques and rising temperatures, war, poverty, increasing population size and poverty, again because of lack of rainfall, droughts, deforestation, overcrowding, and increasing temperatures because of the greenhouse effect. In summary, people can either choose to or are forced to live in hazardous areas because of either they can't afford to live anywhere else or because they find other benefits in living in the hazardous area. The vulnerability of a population is affected by either where they live, as in if they live in a hazard-prone area or not, and population density, uh, awareness of the hazard event, and the preparation of the hazard event. That's it for this video on vulnerability, and next video we'll be talking about production and markets.